You're listening to the Valley Current.
Hey, Raphael.
Hi.
You look great with that piece of art behind you.
Oh, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm great. And, art is the topic today because we're talking about AI generated art, and you're married to an artist. So I thought getting some of your insights to how you think about art and then how we should think as lawyers about this gentleman in Colorado who submitted a piece of art that was generated by an AI software based on a few keywords that he inputted to the software. And he won the prize, but he didn't disclose that he had used software.
I thought he did disclose.
I thought he didn't disclose it, but maybe you're right.
I read an article that said he disclosed it.
Okay. So I'm putting it up on the screen. It was in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Wow, this is an interesting story. This piece of art that he called Theater de Opera Especial in
Right.
Colorado State Fair Fine Arts Competition.
There you see the second paragraph.
Had only hinted at was that the artwork had been created in large part by an artificial intelligence tool called Midjourney, which is kind of freely available. I mean, they try to get you to convert to a paid membership, but it's kind of like an accelerant to anyone who wants to do some artistic brainstorming. I guess that's the way I would think about it. Generating this image at a user's command.
Let's stop there for a moment. There's been the legal question about whether he has the right to claim copyright. And the argument has been the AI produced the work, not him.
Right.
Is that a good argument?
Well, I'll tell you, the case law is going in the direction to say that if it's really generated by the software and not by something that he's really instigated, then he's not the author. Now, people try to use the analogy of, well, what about a photograph? There's a lot of automation these days in the way a photographic image is captured. Now, you do have to point the camera and you do have to press the click button, and presumably you can do a lot of other retouching and that sort of stuff on your own inside of a piece of software as well. But There is a lot of automation that exists for photographers. So I think the way this tool works is you have to input a description.
Yes.
Some detail. So you type in some degree of detail about what you want to appear.
Yes.
And then the tool goes out and presumably looks for other images that they can mash together, is sort of my layman's way of talking about this.
Right. That's what I've read. And now the question is, the sequence of words that I use to prompt the artificial intelligence to create the image, that's mine.
Right. That's your original text if it's not cut and pasted from somewhere else.
Right.
But it's a little bit like saying, like if you went out to an artist like your wife and you said, look, because your wife is a fine artist, and said, look, I want to commission a work and I want the work to be, and then you describe whatever it is. You describe, I want myself as a Roman emperor or something like that. Capture that inside of the Roman Colosseum or something that's your creation, but she implements the piece of art. She's the author, she's the author unless you can claim some co-authorship, but I don't think people would say that commissioning description constitutes co-authorship. I think they would say you have an idea. The idea is not the expression. There's a difference in copyright. Copyright protects the expression, not the idea. You came up with an idea that maybe was secret for a few minutes. Maybe there could be some arguable confidentiality / trade secret protection, but it's not the subject of copyright. It's the subject of whatever expression comes out from the person who does it. Now, instead of a person, we have an artificial being or an artificial intelligence software that's been programmed by others using probably a lot of data that's out there in the public domain, presumably, but maybe some of it's even protected by copyright as well. They don't get into that level of detail.
Right.
But at some level, certainly if you applied for a copyright registration, you have a duty of candor to the Copyright Office. Right. You have to say, I did this and it caused that, and then whatever iterations might have played out, because I think that's the part that's not being expressed here, which is I think you get a draft back and then you can iterate some further descriptions. Correct. Like add more light or add more shadows or do stuff like that. And it is a little bit like having the sidekick who's helping you get something out from an expression point of view. The way we're interacting with each other to explain this to an audience, it's helping the audience understand, well, someone has an idea, the idea responds, the tool responds, and then you get to see what's there, then you refine it, but not by moving any paintbrush over it, but by issuing more textual commands.
Nothing in the concept of copyright that tells the law how you must create what you copyright.
Yeah, no, in fact, you could assemble, cut and paste a bunch of, kids do this all the time. They cut images from magazines, and they put a collage together of different little, sort of puzzle pieces from magazines to create some magical mosaic. It has arguably some pre-existing expression, but it's so sort of cut up that it's hard to identify anymore as expression. Although there could be. It's
transformative. That's a transformative use, and it's a derivative work, and so on. I don't see how these developments, which I feel are interesting, really are requiring changes in the law. I think that the law covers it. I think whether he has the right to a copyright or not is the first question. This guy who made this work, using his sequence of prompts.
Right.
And also, by the way, using his sequence of updates and modifications to improve the work after the original draft. He did all that.
Right.
I think he's entitled to a copyright. In my opinion, I don't see the problem.
Well, is he entitled to a copyright on the text and the sequence of commands, or is he entitled to a copyright on the expressive output that was generated by the tool? I think indirectly what you're saying is both.
Both.
And I think what you're saying is the tool's available to everyone. So if someone comes up with the same sequence of words by their own volition, they get a copyright too on what comes out, even if it's highly similar, because fundamentally they didn't copy from his words. They just independently created their own words, and we're now moving in a direction like the camera example, where a lot of people can take a picture of the Tower of Pisa in Italy.
Right.
You can get your copyright on your particular shot of it, but others will independently do the same thing with their own cameras, and they'll get their own copyright. Right. What they did, it's probably not that robust of a copyright because it's a sort of three-dimensional work that's out there for anyone to take a photograph. Right.
So they can't sue each other for infringement, but they might be able to sue a complete stranger for infringement.
Right.
But that's sort of, when I was in college at Berkeley in philosophy, we used to sit around the coffee shop and argue endlessly about whether computers could play chess.
Right.
Because in those days, it was just beginning. And we used to, talk about it. The idea that chess playing could possibly be farmed out to a computer was outrageous to many of us. And others thought, oh, yeah, sure enough, sooner or later they'll play chess. And this was an argument that I participated in for at least 4 years or 2 years or whatever. And I finally came up with the answer. Yes, computers can play chess, but humans do play chess. Computers don't play chess by themselves. And that's the same with art. Computers can create art, but they don't create art. Humans create art, basically. So focusing like this image was another one done with Midjourney, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. If he wanted to claim a copyright in this, I wouldn't argue with him personally.
Yeah, I think the courts are going to have a challenging time because there's a parallel development that's happened, which is a gentleman, I think his last name is Thaler, Thaleer, or something like that.
Yeah.
Who's kind of been pushing the envelope in the patent office, saying that the AI itself should be considered the inventor. And I think he's done that in the Copyright Office too, saying the AI should be viewed as the author. And both the Patent Office as well as the Copyright Office have said no, citing the constitutional provisions in Article 1, Section 8, saying authors and inventors are humans.
Have to be human. But, the AI itself could be the subject of a patent.
Right.
I haven't read that Midjourney hasn't applied for a patent, as far as I can tell.
Right, because they're going down the path of what I would call the more open source community.
Right.
Everyone
However,
gets to participate.
I don't have a problem with the idea that they're entitled to patent protection for the software.
Right.
They're not entitled to patent protection for the artworks. That's copyright, if anything. But software, yes. And, I don't see it as introducing new problems for the law. It's just a very interesting example of developments in this area.
Well, what I just said a second ago may argue in the direction of it must be a human, because the courts are saying it can't be the AI itself.
Right.
You can't somehow say this non-human owns an issued patent or owns a registration certificate, because there's no person there that actually represents the author or inventor, unless you somehow trace back to the author or inventor of the actual product itself, which most people are saying, but it's not really the product itself, it's the output from the product.
Right.
And so the argument is it took the instigation along with the product, which of course gets you more in the direction of, well, maybe there's some co-authorship or co-inventorship going on.
No, I think it's like a coffee maker. The coffee comes out of the machine, you put the coffee beans in and press the button, and the coffee comes out of the machine. This is the same kind of thing.
And you made the coffee, just like you made the photograph, right?
I can drink the coffee, which the machine can't do.
Right.
Yeah, I don't see it being that difficult legally.
Yeah, I think the courts are going to sort of push in the direction of trying to figure out what degree of protection should be given. And I hear you saying, give it on the full, robust imagery that was generated.
Right.
Because the coffee tastes good and it came out of a machine, but you put the beans in and you press the button and you put the water in, you decided on the water quality and you decided how long to run the brewer for. You did a bunch of stuff, just like adjusting the camera. Right?
And the machine itself is patentable.
Right.
Somebody else can own the patent on the machine, but I own the coffee.
Right. So you don't see a need to change the law.
I don't.
Like, you don't see that the law would necessarily do anything. But I have to tell you, I think both the Patent Office and the Copyright Office are hard at work writing regulations to say they absolutely do not want anyone to claim the inventor is the AI, or that the author is the AI. And they don't necessarily want to even take a position. I think they're going to leave to the courts how to deal with the output, how to deal with what's the actual output, and to what degree is someone like this gentleman who submitted it to this art fair and won this prize
Right.
whether he's really the author of this, or whether there's some other way to think about authorship. And the same thing I think would be true in parallel for inventors and inventorship. And we may see a number of cases sort of go left, right, and sideways before this gets to the courts of appeal, and then eventually, of course, the U.S. Supreme Court. Because I can tell you, there are people that want to believe that the AI itself is almost going to become sentient. Like the AI itself is almost going to have a life form to it. That the AI itself is almost entitled to something for its own credibility or reputation. I don't know how to say that any better, because I don't think the AI needs the money as much as the people that are behind the AI. I mean, the AI comes into being because humans program it into coming into being and load it with data and the like. So it's quite a fabulous question. And I wanted to touch upon something that's related, which is, there was this image of a chimpanzee or a monkey
a few years ago.
A few years ago. And I actually went out and kind of looked at that case, which was brought on behalf of the gorilla. It was actually a picture of a gorilla.
Right.
And, ultimately, the court said the gorilla is not a human. So the same thinking, which is, well, it's closer to being a sentient being, and maybe it predated, obviously the creation and evolution of man, but I'm not going to give any ownership interest in that non-human, even if it's for the benefit of feeding and caring for the gorilla in his old age. I mean, literally, gorilla, it was quite an imagery to see this gorilla, because the gorilla had like this big toothy smile, that truly did tend to make it look as if gorilla actually pressed the button on the camera.
Right.
In that particular,
the gorilla did press the button. That was the argument. One of the arguments.
Yeah, the argument is the gorilla made the coffee. Like the gorilla is the one who did this. So why shouldn't the gorilla get some rights here? Why is it not being handled in that way? I mean, it's quite a question of what's the line here. And there are people pushing this. There are people pushing this envelope, and I don't know if it's for sport or there's really some humanitarian purpose behind it. I don't really know how to think about this in terms of what the motivations are for the lawyers who are backing these movements, if it's just designed to generate publicity or what, that sort of thing.
When I was dealing with a related issue just over the last few days, I have a client who owns 50% of a company, and he's fighting with the other 50% shareholder over who owns what. And there's a lot of intellectual property, including patents.
Right.
And the patents, the other guy is the inventor listed on many of the patents.
Right.
My client was angry about that. He said, he used our company resources. The company should be the inventor. And I told him, has to be a human.
Right.
Even though it can be assigned to the company, but the inventor is the person.
Right.
Similar argument, similar set of considerations.
Right. And usually you nail this stuff down in the context of the corporation signing contracts and the like, right? You usually nail down whether it's work for hire or whether it's an assigned work. Usually you get these assignments. You don't want to sort of embarrass or have an embarrassing ownership issue.
Right. We don't do work for hire in the patent context. We do it in the copyright context.
Yeah, in the patent context, there's a doctrine that's called hired to invent. And it suggests that when a particular individual is hired to invent, they owe an assignment as a matter of state law. They owe some rights of assignment because they were hired and paid to make that invention. And by
Sure.
the way, there's an interesting analogy there that, usually the invention is commission. So I'm putting up the selfie
Right.
of the
Right.
gorilla because it really generated actually some degree of revenue as an image.
Uh-huh.
It was not just cast in the public domain. The argument is the button was pressed by I don't know how he did it. I guess there must be some selfie stick or something in the palm of his hand, right?
Right.
I mean, there must be some way that this happened. And I think this, by the way, this gorilla has since died, apparently, of old age or whatever, or maybe litigation stress or something. I don't know.
Yeah, he should have named you as his heir.
You have to wonder, like, at some level, where we're bringing these animals into the world of litigation. What does it do to shorten their lifespan and their health span? It's not a great thing. But you look like a pretty happy animal at the time, and they tried to push the envelope on this. I think there actually is a case on appeal. Now, there's all sorts of estate issues that will arise if he actually won the appeal, and this money that I think has been generated goes into some trust. Like, who are the beneficiaries? Like, does he have kids, gorilla kids? Like, how far do you want to take this idea?
Right.
Non-human has rights.
Right.
And those rights should be vested and recognized by the federal and state courts,
Right.
and in contract and otherwise.
Right.
So it's interesting, and we're going to see some developments because it seems as though there are lawyers that are motivated to push the boundaries here. I'm not quite sure what the full purpose is, but they seem to be headed in this direction of, let's see how far we can take this and where it can go. And so to me, I think the courts are going to be open for issuing some rulings. And, once you get a number of courts to start issuing rulings, you're going to get some different rulings probably, because someone may say, let's push the boundaries of this and see what the U.S. Supreme Court will do with it, almost like setting up the potential of the U.S. Supreme Court coming in to settle it, right?
I think the idea that only human beings are entitled to copyright, which is, so as far as I've read it so far, I think that's correct.
Mm-hmm.
Also, DALL-E 2, you know about that artificial intelligence art generator.
Right.
I have a friend who's a wonderful illustrator, been earning his living for 50 years as an illustrator.
Right.
And he says he's terrified of DALL-E 2 because it's going to make him irrelevant. And Junko is completely different. She's the opposite of an illustrator. If somebody, in your example, if somebody came to her and asked her to paint a portrait, she would have said, no, thank you. I don't do art. I don't do that kind of art.
Right.
All her art comes from the soul of the artist to the soul of the viewer, which is something AI can't do.
Right. The creativity element is lacking. The instigation has to occur from a human. The descriptive words that are typed in have to come from a human, just like the descriptive idea that your wife comes up with to eventually get something on the canvas, presumably comes from her creativity.
Well, all comes from inside. It's from the soul to the soul. This is very similar to having sex with a doll, a robot. It's not quite sex, even though it may look exactly like that.
And I mean, I can't believe you went there, because in the back of my mind, I was wondering, like, at some level, if the AI does become so intelligent, and there have been some TV shows that have suggested this, they do take on kind of an emotional connection, is what people are suggesting can actually occur. So I don't know, there's been a few films. One is called Her. There was Westworld that had a bunch of robots in it that simulated a Western time frame in the 1800s. I mean, there's a lot of shows that are sort of trying to capture what will this all look like in, say, the next 50, 40, some people think it might be more like 10 or 20 years. And it does seem to be the magic of open source and community that's pushing more and more of the envelope of accelerated development.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, the open source business as you say, it is a complete development and acceleration of this whole kind of thing.
Right.
Now, this one is, you did Jasper and I did some other one I found. And they work fairly well. And it's interesting to train yourself to see the difference, especially if you're a teacher in a college. If some article comes or some essay comes, how can you tell if the student really wrote it?
Well, they run some software. I think the latest approach for teachers is they run some software that tries to see if it can tell whether it's copying. But here we have a tool that is now trying to take the same AI idea of generating content from, just a dozen keywords slammed together, maybe a couple of dozen. Obviously, the more you input, probably the more you get. And then it's going to generate a bunch of what I would assume is pulling various texts from various sources that sort of create a compilation of what you might say could be viewed as garbage, but it's possible, I guess, that you can then do an editing round through the garbage or through the draft, as it were. When I take notes, my notes are often handwritten notes. I don't know if you can see them, but they're very detailed. I'm not able to put this picture up, but very detailed handwritten notes that does look like garbage. But to me, I can interpret my own garbage. I don't know whether if I started dictating into Jasper as I did these notes, what would come out of that. I would tend to think it would be a very esoteric thing. I don't know. It's just interesting to think about, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is.
Well, Raphael, we've come to the end of our time, and you've given me some interesting insights and thoughts.
Feelings mutual.
I do think that you are in a world, in the art world to some degree, because your wife is in the art world. And I think your comments about the soulfulness and spiritualness of the creative process and the expressive process will never be captured by a machine. Just like you could say the AI chess tools are just hacks that are running through thousands and thousands of permutations, but not really engaged in any creative chess play.
That's a very interesting. Chess and Go, those two games, are a little different, in my opinion, from art and poetry.
Yes.
Because we ourselves, when we play chess, we're trying to dive into a world of rules and forecasting like artificial intelligence. But when we create art, that's not what we're doing. We're doing something else.
Right.
So these are related examples, but not identical, in my opinion.
Right.
But it's interesting. We're going to see more and more in this field. And, in 5 years, you and I will be talking about this. It'll be a lot different.
Absolutely. And I hope and look forward to those discussions, Raphael.
Yes.
So thanks for spending the time this afternoon. I'll look forward to talking with you again. Take care.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Be well, Jack.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.